Hi everyone, and a very warm welcome to our latest Euronews virtual debate. My name is Damon Embling. I'm a journalist with Euronews, and I got the great pleasure of hosting and moderating this event for the next 60 minutes or so. Thank you very much indeed for joining us from wherever you are in the world. Promises to be a lively discussion over the next 60 minutes. So, what are we discussing today? Well, we're going to be focusing on the future of this. No, it's not a glass of gin, of course. It's a glass of water, that precious resource that sustains life on our planet and is very much part of our daily lives on a daily basis, in industry and everything that we do. We're going to be debating its future in the context of all those climate change threats that we hear about. We're going to be asking the questions around what Europe should and could be doing to tackle those threats. We're going to be looking at investment, technology, innovation, and also public and private partnerships, all those things that are really important now as we look to the future of water to ensure that there is that safe and adequate supply for all of us here in Europe, but also around the world. We've got a great panel of guests lined up to discuss this today, and I'd love you to get involved in the conversation as much as possible as well. If you have any questions for any of the guests that I'm about to introduce you to, do leave them in the chat box just below the video screen where you're watching. We've got 10 or 15 minutes or so lined up at the end of today's event to get those questions to our panelists a bit later on. So please do join in the conversation. Now, without further ado, let's join our guests now and introduce you to our great lineup, our great panel that we have to discuss this. First of all, let's go over to Brussels in Belgium and say hello to Asita Kanko, who's a Belgian MEP, a member of the European Parliament. She's also Vice Chair of the European Conservatives and Reformist Group in the European Parliament and a member of the Parliamentary Group on Water. Hi to you, Asita. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let's go across to Spain now and to sunny Murcia, where we're joined by Juan Pardo Martinez, who's the Research and Development Director at Nova Agric, which is a company working in the smart agriculture sector. Hi to you, Juan. Nice to see you there.
Hello.
Hi. Nice. Thanks for joining us. Let's go across to the other side of the Atlantic and to Argentina, where we're joined today by Sol Oshuela, who's in the capital, Buenos Aires. She's the Global Director of Policy and Campaigns at the global NGO Worldraid. Hi to you, Sol. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And last but not least, we're joined by Professor Justin Sheffield, who's a professor of hydrology and remote sensing and is also head of school for geography and environmental science at the University of Southampton. Hi to you, Justin.
Hi, David. Nice to be here.
Great to have your company. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. So let's get stuck into this conversation, shall we? Let's first of all go over to Sol in Buenos Aires at Worldraid. Sol, let's set some context for this really in terms of where we're at with water. I know that Worldraid works in many parts of the world, mainly in Asia, Africa, Latin America, very much working on the ground to ensure that there's safe and accessible water supplies to communities. What are some of the big challenges that we're facing around water at the moment in your experience?
Thank you, Damien. Thanks for having me. Well, we work across Africa, Asia, mostly a bit in Latin America. And the reason why Worldraid exists is because nearly 1 in 3 people still live with no water close to home. And this is impacting every aspect of people's lives. So from access to food and being able to be food secure to good health. So imagine giving birth in a health center with no access to running water. Half of those in the least developed countries have no water. Or being a girl who has to go and walk miles to pick up water and basically therefore isn't able to go to school. So this is why Worldraid exists. This is why we work in the countries where we work. And it's a challenge today where millions of people live without access to water, without access to sanitation, or even soap. And it's affecting.
And it's quite shocking that we're talking about this in 2022, isn't it?
We're talking about this in 2022. In 2022, you have almost 800 million people without access to clean water, which is one of the most basic necessities of life. And this is affecting women and girls more than anything, as you can expect, and making their lives very undignified.
Okay, Sol, thanks for that for now. Let's go over to Justin Sheffield at the University of Southampton. Justin, when we think about things like drought and lack of water, we may think instantly of continents like Africa, but the irony is that places like Africa are actually sitting on a lot of water, aren't they?
Yeah, that's right, Damon. When you think about Africa, you often think about it being a very dry place. It actually turns out in many places there is actually, on average, quite a lot of water from rainfall, enough to sustain crops. But one of the biggest problems is the variability over the season, but also from year to year. So giving you either too much water that causes floods or too little water that causes droughts, and real problems there. But something that's really untapped, as you were hinting at, is groundwater. This is a huge resource in many parts of Africa, but there are lots of uncertainties about how to use that sustainably. You don't want to start using something that's going to dry up in 5 years and incentivize practices that are not sustainable. So lots more work needs to be done to really understand that on a local level and how to use that resource in a sustainable way.
So the problem of too much or too little water, we're going to elaborate on that a bit later on and discuss that in a bit more detail. Just as we set the general context for this debate, though, I'd like to go over to Asita now, the Belgian MEP who joins us in Brussels. Asita, I think it'd be very easy for many of us in Europe to sit back and think, water, well, it's not really a problem in Europe, is it? There's those other continents and those other countries. Yes, they've got the challenges and there are things being done to try to counter the threats that they face. But some people might think, well, it hasn't really hit us in Europe and we don't really need to worry about it. Would you go along with that? I mean, what's the EU thinking about this?
Well, thank you very much for organizing this debate and also for having me join you. I think it's underestimate the fact that access to water is also an issue in Europe is widely underestimated. Just like last summer in Belgium, there were discussions and news about issues with water, and people were advised not to put some water on their plants in the gardens, not to use water for other issues. And there is also the cost that comes with it, and that is quite high for single parents, for example, who have to pay the energy bill. They also have to pay the water bill. So we feel that there is financially a request for that. Of course, the consequence of this difficult access to water will be different depending on the level of development of a country. If you take a poor African country, it will be different, of course, and have a deeper impact on access of girls to education, because there will not even, it's not only an access to clean water that is the issue. It's in Europe, it's the cost, it's the availability, but you have the infrastructure. You know, in Africa, like in Burkina Faso, where I grew up, you didn't even have the running water everywhere. So it was not even a matter of how can we technically provide it. It was just even not possible. So girls had to go very far. I did it as well as a kid to fetch water. And that is a point that we need to keep in mind. And I guess visited Iraq and Kurdistan last week, and I arrived there, I landed in the sandstorms. So you see, this is one of the places in the world where it's going to be very difficult to even have water, just for whatever it is. I'm in the water group, but I'm also shadow rapporteur of the access to water report, that is a drought report. But we will elaborate on it later. I'm sure you will have questions about that. I hope I could answer your first question.
Yeah, indeed. And just briefly, it's EU Green Week this week, and we're having a special Green Week on Euronews as well. And we're in partnership with the EU Green Week, bringing lots of different news and stories about issues on our planet. How much is water part of your EU Green Week and the EU Green Deal that we hear so much being talked about?
Well, I think there are a lot of labels on files that people discuss, but since I was working this week in the European Parliament, I'm afraid I didn't notice a lot about the EU Green Week because people are just going on with legislative files. But it's good that you're pointing it out. I think we should not only wait for Green Weeks or narratives about green deals to focus on things like that, the access to water, the impact on education, etc. But we need to do it every day because it does not make an appointment with people to make their life difficult. The situation just exists and they have to face it. So it should be a permanent issue that we address, but it's good that specifically there is a time in the year also to focus on it. But as I said, it's really underestimated. In the Parliament, you will hear people speaking about security. You will hear people speaking about the war or speaking about other kind of policies, but you will not really hear people speak. You will hear speaking about energy, but speaking about water is not very often happening.
Okay, Asita, thank you very much indeed for now. Juan, I'd like to go over to you in Murcia in Spain at Novagric, a company working in the smart agriculture sector. As we talk about this in terms of setting the context for this debate today, obviously industry and business have got a big role to play in the future of water. You're involved in the agriculture sector, which is thirsty for water. I think it accounts for about 70% of the usage of fresh water supply. So it's drinking a lot of water. Do you think industry, including agriculture, is waking up to the problem of water and where it's going in the future?
Hello, Damon. Thank you for inviting me to today's interesting debate about the future of water. And from our position as a company based in the southeast of Spain that design and install fertigation and irrigation systems, we think that there is in some regions of Europe, southern Europe and some Mediterranean areas, there is a great concern about the availability of water. Here in Murcia and Almeria, we are pioneers in the use of water for agriculture. But now, let me give you a specific data. Here, the use of fresh water available for agriculture is the 90% of the available resources.
90%?
So for this, 90% caused by the high agriculture developed here in this area. And we need to have a water warranty here. Also, we are demand or request by the use of technology to be use another water resource as purified and desalinate water, and improve technologies that helps to gain efficiency and saving in the water, in the fresh water source.
Okay, Juan, thank you for that. And we're going to elaborate on technology and look at one of your projects that you're running in Spain at the moment that has some important implications for the rest of Europe going forward in terms of technological use. So I'll come back to you on that in a moment. Just to our audience, if you're just joining us for this latest Euronews virtual debate, welcome. If you have any questions for any of the panelists that you can see on the screen today, please do leave them in the chat box just below the video screen where you're watching. We're debating everything about the future of water. So if you have any questions, do get those across to us. I'd like to go back now to Justin Sheffield at the University of Southampton in the UK. Justin, we hear a lot of talk about climate change, don't we? And there are still some doubters and some skeptics. But the fact is that we do seem to be seeing a lot more sort of harsher weather phenomenon. You know, we talked earlier about having too little or too much water. So in terms of droughts and extreme flooding, all that sort of thing. You are a bit of an expert in sort of predicting droughts, I know, but how easy is it to kind of come up with a picture of where climate change is going in the world right now, and ultimately what it could mean for Europe in the future years?
Yeah, thanks. So we are seeing evidence of climate change, strong evidence of climate change in many aspects, in many places. Obviously, global temperatures going up is quite clear. And along with that, more intense and more frequent heat waves. We're definitely seeing that. We can see that in our meteorological records. We're also seeing more intense precipitation. We can see that in our precipitation records as well. And that's quite clear in many places. And the theory behind that is quite sound. What is more difficult is trying to understand how things like floods and droughts are changing. I think there's evidence there in some places, but it's much more difficult because we need long-term records. We also need to disentangle the drivers of things like floods, because it's not just caused by heavy precipitation, it's also caused by direct anthropogenic impacts. So land use change, for example, can exacerbate the risk of floods as well. So some aspects of climate change are a little bit more difficult to tease out and say whether things are changing, but there are certain regions of the world where we've seen strong changes in, say, precipitation overall. So the Mediterranean is one area where there should be quite, large concerns, even though there's, as Juan said, there's good adaptation for many years and good use of technology to approach this. And if we look to the future as well, one of the regions where our climate models are actually showing us where there's going to be big problems in the future is the Mediterranean. And there's quite some consensus across climate models that area will get will get drier overall, but also more extreme events and more flood events as well. So you have this combination of overall drying plus more extreme events, which is going to be a real challenge in the future. But we do need to get better models and reduce those uncertainties as well, so we can make better decisions.
And we've seen big flooding events in countries like Germany and the UK over recent years, and in places like Greece, Spain, Portugal, a big occurrence of wildfires, which obviously can have a huge effect on the impact on those communities that are affected, that are in the sort of firing line, so to speak. I mean, Justin, is this problem around not being able to have a full, accurate data set, a full, accurate picture, is that part of the problem in terms of getting people to act? Because if you don't have that in front of them and they don't see it as a real risk, maybe they think, well, it's not for something that we need to worry about today.
Yeah, a lot of it is about experience. It's about what you've experienced over the last year, what you can remember over the last 10 years. I often talk to my students about their perceptions of climate change and extreme events. And, they may have experienced the flood event when they were younger, their community got flooded, and so they have a real perception about these extreme events. But we also have to think about our memory, and we're talking about climate change that's not happening over 5 years or 10 years, but it's happening over decades. And it's very difficult to remember back, 30 or 50 years ago to really understand how things have changed. So we do have to rely on scientists like myself to actually provide that evidence. And again, that is a challenge, because we need those long records of floods, droughts, and extreme precipitation to be able to say something meaningful about whether climate is changing or not. But there are lots of records that are indicating that it is in certain aspects.
Okay, Justin, thanks for your analysis around that. Let's go back to Asita Kanko in Brussels, the Belgian MEP. Asita, a lot of people have predicted that as the planet warms up, and there might be this sort of migration shift of more people moving from places like Africa, heading north up into Europe. So the kind of flow of people in the future could also have a big impact, not only on the growth of populations, but also in terms of water supply. I mean, is that something that worries Europe as well?
Well, I think people who are moving around because of water, access to water, are not really moving very far. In my experience, just empirically seeing what has been happening in the regions where I grew up, and looking at the news that I receive now from these populations, they are usually, when there is not enough water, unless you have a farm, it's mostly a problem for women. So what these women do usually...
You talk about women all the time. Why is there a particular problem?
Because I'm talking about that because, because of my own background and what I see in the data. I grew up in Burkina Faso, one of the most the driest places in the world. It's the south is a bit okay, but the north is really in the Sahel, and you feel. I had a sandstorm. We had a sandstorm when I was 5 years old. I mean, luckily it's the only one that we had when I was a child, but you couldn't see anything. So when I was in Baghdad last week and saw the sandstorm, I'm like, oh my God, I remember this happened to us as well. And you see, it's really dry, and women and girls have to make sure that there is enough, because of the repartition of tasks that is quite traditional and religious. Women and girls are the ones who are in charge of water supply, who have to make sure that there is enough food, who have to make sure that there is enough water, to take a shower, to wash the clothes, because washing is also a task that women are actually doing in these communities, and they have to make sure that there is enough water to drink. In Europe, what I experience is that we drink water because water is healthy. I always drink water, and I really hate the taste of water here, so I just put a lot of lemon in it, or all kind of other things. But as I was a kid in Burkina Faso, I never drank water because it was healthy. I drank because I was thirsty. You were so thirsty, you thought you were going to die, and then you really have to drink water, and then you feel relieved after you have your water. So this feeling of being thirsty is something that we don't really happen to have in Europe, because drink all kinds of things. So these women and girls...
Do you think also people will migrate, or do you think they'll migrate within their own countries?
No, I think they do migrate inside their own country, but not really far. And sometimes they just don't migrate anyway. These girls and women, while they're busy fetching water, they're not going to school, they're not doing a job that gets money for themselves. They're just overly dependent, and they have to comply. They spend their life doing this. I was also carrying water like 20 times per day in the morning on my head from the well to home. And when 3 guys take a shower, then there is no water anymore. You have to go again. So the first reason why I really hated men was because they were taking showers and I had to go and get water. So, well, that is the situation. And when you are doing that, you're not at school. So you really have to run to school. So it's a poverty also for the area. And people who are able to run away and to migrate to go very far, usually they have money to pay someone to help them cross or to pay a ticket or whatever. So it's not these people who are actually in this position. So I don't believe that the women and girls who are fragile are the ones who are going to run away, but people who are more comfortable, but who will run away because of the macroeconomic situation that will have an impact on their lives. But we need to invest in access to water. This will provide sanitary and will also help girls' education. That is the biggest threat, I think.
Okay, Sita, thanks for that. Sol, let's go back to you in Buenos Aires at Worldraid, the global NGO. What's your experience of water causing displacement in terms of moving people? Because I guess if people don't have access to clean, accessible water, yes, they might have these awful, tortuous journeys that they have to make to find it, but also maybe they don't have the water to grow crops and to feed into their agriculture system. Have you seen much displacement? And do you worry that in the future with climate change that people will move internationally as well, if they can?
I think we are worried about the impact that climate change is having on water resources. And we are very mindful of the need to engage and work with local communities, with local people, with the villages to make sure that the solutions that are found in terms of managing the water resource are sustainable, right? Are future-proofed, let's say. And when it comes to climate change, it is really important to make sure that there's good systems to access the data, as Justin was talking about, right? That are local, that are relevant for the local geography, and to make sure that the service that is provided either by a municipality or by a provincial government is absorbing that data and making sure that then it's helping manage the water resource in a way that that is aware of climate change and the impact that climate change is having on a particular place, whether that's too much water or too little water, right? And I guess that there's many different ways in which climate change manifests itself in terms of access to water, as Justin was saying. Sometimes it's a flood, sometimes it's a drought, sometimes it's water of bad quality, like in Bangladesh, and the problems with salinization of the water resource. So I think what's important is to find those local solutions that involve local people, and then issues like migration can be prevented, right? It's not that you need to migrate in order to find water. You can, if you manage the resource well, if you have the data to make you aware of the climate risk, then it's easier to find the solution there.
How do you get those communities involved, though, and get them looking to the future with hope? Because some of them might have lost faith in the government, the local services, private providers, all those sorts of things. And they might just think, well, this is my life now. I've got hardly any access to water and I will have to walk 10 kilometers a day to get it. It obviously is not acceptable. But how do you change that? And how do you get the community on board to kind of empower them for themselves to do something about it?
Well, working in partnership across governments, the villages, the private sector is absolutely important and crucial as part of the solution to the water crisis. And that's Worldraid's approach. We work across many different stakeholders. In terms of the communities, I think it's about, again, putting them at the center of the solution. Asita was talking about Burkina Faso. We work in Burkina Faso, and one of the things, for example, that we're doing is we are supporting the village to monitor the climate risks. So that, for example, when water supplies fall and below a certain level before the next rains, then villagers are self-imposing a rationing system that prioritizes access to water for drinking water over, for example, watering or livestock or irrigation. So I think those type of solutions that put the needs of the community at the center and put the local communities as key actors in finding and implementing the solution are absolutely essential for the sustainability of these services.
Okay, Sol at Worldraid, thank you very much indeed. Juan, let's go back to you at Novagric in Spain, a company working in the smart agriculture sector. Getting communities involved is also important in agriculture as well, I guess, because increasingly people want traceability. They want goods, so fruit and vegetables that are grown close to their home. They also want it to be organic and sustainable. So in terms of the future of water, how is the face of agriculture now changing, do you think?
Damon, the impact of climate change in the agriculture is very significant. According with the climate data, the last 5 years are very warm compared to the previous year. It is causes that one of the problems of our southern regions in Europe, the desertification, this means the loss of fertile soil and vegetation are increasing. As the European Agency Environment report, maybe in the future, the southern and Mediterranean areas in Europe could lose agriculture and livestock production because of the climate change. Also, another data by 2050, the loss in incomes in the agriculture may be the 16%, according with some studies. And right now, the climate change, keep in mind that the 40% of the total European land in Europe is for agriculture, and our sector employs 44 million of people.
So it's a massive industry with the stakes are very high. In terms of the future of water, though, and in terms of climate change, do you think the risk is that the planet will dehydrate before it starves? Is that the situation? They'll be running out of water before we run out of food. Is that the problem?
Yes. In fact, absolutely, yes, it's a problem.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much indeed for that for now. If you're just joining us on this Euronews virtual debate, welcome. Thank you very much indeed for being there wherever you are in the world today. If you have any questions about the future of water, which our guests are just discussing here today, we're here for the next 35 minutes or so. If you've got any questions, do leave them in the chat box just below the video screen where you're watching. And we've got 10 minutes or so at the end of this debate to get some of your questions to our panelists. So do get involved. Now, as you heard, one of our guests today is Sol from Worldraid. We're going to get back to her in a moment. But first of all, we've been chatting to one of Sol's experts within Worldraid, a water expert called Vinny Casey. And he's been telling us a little bit more about the NGO's global concerns about climate change. Take a listen to what he had to tell us.
We see climate change as a major threat to water supply, especially as we look forward into the future. We see it increasing the frequency of droughts, increasing the frequency of flooding, resulting in infrastructure damage and contamination of water supplies. It also exacerbates existing threats to water services, such as increasing demand, contributing to water shortages. I'm Vinny Casey. I'm a senior water supply advisor at WaterAid. WaterAid work in 28 countries. An example of our work from Ethiopia, where I've been many times and seen the situation on the ground there, includes provision of boreholes and also construction of large-scale piped water supply schemes. No matter whether you're in Europe or sub-Saharan Africa or Asia, three things need to be addressed for water security. People need well-managed water resources, well-managed services, and well-managed water risk. All of the challenges associated with these things need to be tackled if people are to have reliable access to water services in the face of climate change.
Vinny Casey from Worldraid talking to us there. Thank you very much indeed for taking part in that video, Vinny. Really giving us a bit more on what Worldraid is thinking about the climate change threats. Let's go back to Sol now from Worldraid, who's joining us from Argentina today. Sol, there's a couple of key things I want to pick up on from that video. First of all, we heard Vinny there giving some examples of some of the projects that you're doing on the ground, the supply of water, boreholes, those sorts of things. Where is your sort of focus now in terms of projects to bring clean and accessible water to communities? Where are you really focusing your work on the ground?
Well, technology and infrastructure, it's a really important part of the solution, and I think it's the most visible and easy to understand part of the solution of providing water to people. But it's sometimes not the most important, or it's obviously a part of it, but there's more complex bits which we need to get right, which Worldraid is focusing a lot on, which is on making the service work, right? Everything around the infrastructure. You can install the greatest most innovative pipe, but if it breaks and you have no one who understands how to fix it, then that's not going to work, right? So it's about finding those solutions that are future-proofed, as I was speaking. And there's quite a few things that you need to focus on in order to make those solutions future-proofed. First, you need political will. You need leaders that understand the issue and that understand the solutions to the problems of the water crisis. You need those leaders at a national government, at a local government level, etc. You need expertise. You need the technicians that know how to fix if something goes wrong. And then you need a service, the right policies that regulate the way that water, gets shared, so that everyone benefits, and it's not only the most powerful who maybe have access to water, and the people who lack, the poorest people, the most excluded, also are able to benefit from that service. So it's easy to think that it's always a technical infrastructure solution, but there's much more in our experience, there's much more to it than just having the pump or the pipes installed.
Okay, Sol, thank you for that. Let's go back to Justin at the University of Southampton, Professor Justin Sheffield. There were 3 key points, Justin, at the end of that video, weren't there? Good management of resources, good management of services, and well-managed risk in terms of kind of guaranteeing water security going forward. Would you go along with those? And what do you think are some of the issues around that? I mean, Sol was mentioning there political will, which is obviously a big factor, I guess.
Yeah, all of those issues are extremely important. As Sol was saying, it's often making that connection with the national policymakers and where the effects and the solutions really are on the ground. And often there's a disconnect between those. We've recently done quite a lot of work in Malawi and working with communities to understand their water security issues. And some of the best ways forward we've made is to actually connect them with the ministries, because we visited ministries as well, and actually get those people to come to those communities and see what the problems are. And Sol has talked about some of those problems. It's about sustainability of putting in boreholes and making sure that they can be fixed when they break. And these things aren't thought about sometimes. You need the technical capacity and the resources after the fact. We've also seen this with large-scale irrigation. This could be a real solution to the water and food problem in many places, is to get irrigation into places where you don't have enough rainfall or it's too variable. But you have to really think about how that's going to be maintained, and who's going to look after it and what the resources to make that continue. And we've seen, I have colleagues who've worked on studies where there have been planned irrigation schemes right across Africa, and only about 10% of those have actually fulfilled their original potential. And that's a really worrying statistic. And it's a lot to do with the governance. It's a lot to do with the technical capacity and the resources that are there in place after the initial scheme has been put in place. So yes, it's definitely management, it's governance, it's definitely strong policy that connects down to the communities that really need that support as well.
Asita Kanko, Belgian MEP, joining us from Brussels today. So we need the political will, we need strong governance, strong services, strong investment, all those things to kind of make all this happen. We hear a lot, don't we, in the EU when we talk about climate change and the Green Deal. It's all about carbon mostly. That seems to be the sort of buzzword of today, and setting lots of carbon cutting targets. Obviously really important. But when you look at all that, you think, well, where does water fit into all of this? Because we don't hear water being talked about much at an EU policy level. Would you agree with that? And what do you think needs to be done now?
Well, I think I would like to focus on 3 points that I would like to make now. First of all, we are very much in a passive position where we only want to fix things that are going wrong, but we don't want to anticipate really to make things happen well. And that is a pity. So we are focusing on carbon, but that's one thing. I think we really need to look at being more proactive and anticipating much better. And second, we need to have a global approach, because what we succeed much often to do is to put our own corporations under pressure, while in other areas in the world, people are not really caring a lot about what's going on. So we need to use our diplomatic power and make sure that there is a better global cooperation for climate change, for tackling climate change, and also better investing in research and innovation and making companies join us in the effort instead of being in a fight mode, because it's a matter of cooperation. And the third point I would like to make here is that when we need to speak much more about access to water and a comprehensive approach to that issue. And we need to remember that water supply is not only a public it's not only a matter of public policy. It is also something that can be private. I think we need whatever can help to have better access to water. We need to join forces also in that area. In the process of negotiation for the access to water file in the Human Rights Committee is very intense because we have colleagues who only want that only the government can supply water. You can maybe when you sit in Europe think that this is a very good idea, but there are really countries where, I wouldn't want Putin to be the one who can give me water because sometimes he can decide not to give it to me. So I think we need to take into account that the government is not really everywhere in the world always your friend and always looking at your best interest, and that we need to combine supply by government, by public sector, but also letting the private sector in, but being very strict on how the game is played, because water is not like a commodity just like any other thing. It's very much linked to primary needs and to basic human rights. So that is what we need to see, and it is something that we need to take into account.
Okay, Asita, thank you very much indeed for that. Some very important points that you make there. Juan, let's go back to you in Spain at Novagric. I was mentioning there that there doesn't seem to be much talk about water at a sort of policy level in Europe and the rest of the world, but there are a lot of carbon targets that are set. I mean, companies, organizations, they're under immense pressure to meet those, particularly in Europe. Do you think there should be some sort of target set for water usage? Do you think that would make more companies act and do more in the future?
Yes, the farmers and the Agritex company, we are rated to the climate change threats. We are pioneers in the use of water for agriculture, and our sector are rated by developed technology that provide technology that contributes to the efficiency and saving of water, freshwater resource use. We have to deal with it in the future, and it's very important to adapt it.
Okay, great. And this brings me very nicely to a video that we've made with one of your colleagues, Juan, because as Juan was mentioning there, technology is a big part of what they're doing in Spain at their company. They're in the smart agriculture sector in terms of the way that we grow things in the future and cutting back on the use of water. One of the projects that Juan's working on with his colleagues is called Green Domo, which is shaking up the way that we grow fruit and vegetables. Well, it might well do in Europe in the future. Let's take a look at this video to find out a little bit more.
The Green Domo project was thought for improving the efficiency of the consumable needed for growing vegetable, trying to get the maximum production with the minimum inputs. Hi, I'm Diego Teruel, the business director of Technova. This system can grow vegetable and fresh aromatic product all year round. Crops are growing in a vertical way, using a system that can turn itself 360 degrees following the direct radiation of the sun. Also has a system for recirculation of the water, avoiding wasting water that is not used by the plant. Right now we are working setting up the right strategy for growing vegetables in this kind of greenhouse. This technology can help Europe to reduce the water and carbon footprint.
Well, a very high-tech vision going on there in Spain. Juan, let's go back to you. So that looks like the future then, fruit and vegetables growing vertically. And you're saying there that it's going to cut down on water usage. By exactly how much then? I mean, what's your aims of this project?
Okay, Damon, first, let me thank Euronews. The great interest has shown in this project for some years now. Green Domo is a project that addresses a area of challenge, technical, and the concept is greenhouse designing for a large-scale urban system cultivation that are architecturally integrated into any urban space. So the main objective is the development of high technology system for the urban environment that allow in the multi-level distribution. We have a high yield of crops. We have reaching up to 8 times more than production did in a conventional greenhouse.
8 times.
This product,
okay,
8 times, up 8 times, yes,
okay.
right. This production, this high production system has been possible thanks to the use of different precision agriculture together, working together, to use in more efficient and saving way the natural resources are needed for growing the plants, sun radiation and water. We not use in this urban farming system artificial lighting, as Diego explained. We are designing a hydroponic tower that are roads that can receive an uniform sun radiation. And regarding the water resource, we has thinking about the use of hydroponic system. The hydroponic system is a kind of hydroponic system that has the main characteristic of the plant without soil or any substrate. The roots are in aerial environment, and with this system we get a great water saving, because the water is only used to spray a nutrient-rich base solution on the hanging roads, and we have lower requirements in energy and water than with other systems.
So how much water can you save then, Juan?
How can water is saving? We
how
have
much? How
many,
much water? Yeah,
how much? Yes, how much? 1/5 time than in other production method in fertigation that are usually you can find in the conventional greenhouse.
And I know, Juan, that the idea for this kind of project is to actually use these kind of greenhouses in urban areas, so like on rooftops and close to commercial centres, so actually taking food production closer to people as well.
Yes, the main idea of the Green Domo is the design of a urban food production system that bring the fresh fruit and vegetables to the final consumer by reduce the cost of transport and storage resource. Okay. Finally, we have think in a concept, in a new food concept that are working with the agriculture into the urban, into the city. So this is a part of a concept about 0 kilometer that finally we are, as Diego said, we are develop new technology to reduce the carbon and water footprint in the agriculture, in the food production.
Yeah, and Juan, just briefly, who will pay for this? Who will buy this and who will operate it? I mean, what's your idea? That you're going to sell this to government? So you're going to sell it to companies? How's it going to work in the future?
Yes, we have received very interesting offers for the Sun Spanish Council, and also we have received the interest of an American company that are strongly investment in new ways to produce food in an efficient and sustainable way.
Okay, great. Juan, thank you very much indeed for explaining the Green Domo project. Very insightful there, and a very high-tech project that's going on in Spain, just in Sheffield at the University of Southampton. What did you make of that? I think you're slightly biased though, because don't you have a similar project going on in Southampton at the moment?
We do, yeah. We have an undergraduate student-led project. It's a social enterprise project called Enactus that's actually in previous incarnations with other cohorts of students has won global prizes for their work. They're currently putting in a hydroponics system in the quad just outside of where I am right now. It's not quite as advanced as what Juan has just shown there, but it's very much focused on the social enterprise in that they're selling the produce to a local restaurant, and half of what the restaurant buys they give to a local food bank. So it has very much a kind of social impact to it as well. So it's very interesting to see what Juan is doing.
Great. Sol, let's go over to you at Worldraid. You touched briefly on technology earlier on. I mean, what do you think of projects like that? And how useful do you think they could really be in real life? Because, I mean, if you wanted to put these kind of greenhouses in some of the countries that you work in, it would A, require the investment, it would need B, people to operate them, and C, it would require the will to operate them, whether that comes from private companies or the government. Do you think technology and innovation really does have a place in the future of water? Is it tangibly going to be useful?
Well, of course, I think it's really important, and technology and innovation has right throughout the decades helped you solve so many social problems. Of course, they have to be context specific, right? And they have to work for a particular place where you're trying to find that solution. And again, in our experience of working in places in Africa and in Asia, problems of access to water for the poorest people, we know what the solutions are, that it's about investing in the service, it's about making sure that there's political leaders that care about the issue, it's about the right policies, and it's about all of the sectors working together. So while, of course, technology can play a really important role, there's some really basic stuff that we still need to do that we still haven't got right.
And Asita, what do you think of technology and innovation? Where does the focus need to be, and who needs to fertilize it?
I am very positive about technology and innovation. I think that it always needs to go together with ethics, just like anything in life nowadays. But while we regulate and make sure that ethics are taken into account, we should never block the innovative process. I think that is what sometimes the lack of flexibility of policy makers and the lack of dialogue between innovators like the project I just heard about, and other very good projects going on, NGOs, organizations also like Worldraid. I think there needs to be much more dialogue between policymakers and those on the ground, so that we have solutions that are not designed to block, but designed to relieve and also to unlock all the potential that we are not using right now. At the same time, I saw experiences because of the work I'm doing now about water, of people who produce water being just using air in the desert, and it's quite amazing. So I think I am totally open to that. If you show me a flying horse, I will ask you how you managed to, and I will try to help you if that works. Okay? So for me, it's not totally impossible. A lot of things were impossible until people did them. Like me sitting here talking to you was even maybe impossible for girls like myself. So I totally believe in the innovative capacity. We need to be open-minded about it, but it's very difficult politically to get agreements about such topics, especially in the European Parliament, just because we're not listening to each other. And I hope we'll. I invite organizations like yourself also to push for that. And the conversation we're having right now is one of the things that contribute to learn more from each other to see how to advance.
Okay, Asita, thank you very much indeed for that. If you are just joining us in our audience, welcome. Got a couple more minutes to get your questions in if you have anything for our panelists to answer this afternoon. I'm going to be getting to those in just a moment. Thank you very much indeed for all of the questions that you've sent in. I will be getting to those in just 1 or 2 minutes. I've just got 1 or 2 more questions before we finish here. Asita, I'd like to go back to you. Obviously, water is a big part of our lives, as we all know. It's a big part of business, a big part of industry, a big part of the supply chain. We've seen with things like Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the fallout of that the supply chain has been badly affected. Are there some lessons that are being learned about supply chain disruption right now that could be applied to water in the future in terms of what we need to do to prepare for supply chain disruption?
I'm sure there are lessons to learn. I'm not an engineer or a technical expert, but from my point of view as a politician and as a citizen, I think that wherever information or commodities or products are being transported, whether it is on the ground or online, we have learned recently that we need to be careful about that. Look at all the cyber attacks, look at what is happening about the dependence on oil and gas, look at what is happening, I think, for water. It's really something that people can take an entire village as an hostage because of that. I remember that when I was 12 years old, we had this, you could just sit home and suddenly you don't have electricity anymore. And it's like kind of 40 degrees. So what do you do? What do you study? And if it's at night, how do you even put any light on? So who puts that electricity off? So you see, it's not just by accident. And we had also sometimes you just think, oh, let me get some water to drink. You don't get the water from the fridge, you get it from the tap. The tap is usually outside in front of the door. You go outside to get some water, and when you open the tap, there is no water. So you just yelling. I remember yelling to everyone, oh, the waters are stopped. So it means someone stopped the water, or there is no supply, or there is pressure. So someone could just take the water as an hostage. I think that is a serious possibility in places where it's quite unstable. And I do believe you need to protect these sources and the way in which you are transporting them, not only against, hygiene issues, but also against criminals who can actually do that. And if it's very hot and you don't have water, it can really become very depressing very fast.
Okay, Sita, thank you. Justin, would you go along with all of that? What do you think could happen to supply chains in the future if these risks aren't managed properly in Europe and the rest of the world?
Well, a lot can happen. We've seen that many times before, where we see, for example, a drought happening in one country that's affecting, crop production, and there's a trade in that crop, then that affects supply chains. It affects food production, food trade. It affects food security in some places, and we're starting to, I think, to see that because of the Ukraine war, the impacts on the wheat exports, and in some places, if there's real water dependency in those supply chains, we can change it, but we can't do it with everything, and we're probably going to see that in terms of global food insecurity, because there potentially is no alternative to some of the wheat supplies that would normally be coming from Ukraine. So we need to do a lot to try to understand the resiliency of these supply chains that are water dependent, and in some places critically water dependent, and think about how to, should we be changing those? Should we be growing certain types of water thirsty crops in certain areas where we're using unsustainable groundwater to do that, for example? Should we be doing it in different ways to make it much more resilient? That's a lot about planning around water and understanding water footprints, but it's a lot around global trade and the economic drivers around that as well.
Okay, Justin, so lots at stake there. Sol, final question from me to you before we get to our audience questions. Obviously, there's a lot of talk here about what industry should be doing, government should be doing, partnerships, investment, technology and innovation. But how much also does this come down to changing mindsets, particularly of people, consumers, about using water going forward? And also consumers that, particularly in Europe at the moment, are under pressure with high bills coming from their utility providers. What would you say that needs to change in terms of consumer mindsets? Or do you think they're already changing?
Yes, I think we discussed before how the issue of carbon is so high up in the agenda, and there's such an awareness of that, and that maybe we need something, that type of awareness, a similar type of awareness for issues on water. So I think that's absolutely, the right question to ask. I think businesses have a major role to play in making sure that they use water sustainably. Justin was giving a few examples of that. We are, for example, part of an initiative that is looking at encouraging sustainability, accountability of businesses when it comes to the use of water, the fair water footprints, and that's initiatives like that really encourage and make sure that businesses are aware of their impact on water and what they can do to make that better. So I think that there is an increased awareness. There's more that needs to be done, and I think that we all have a role to play: NGOs, businesses, academics, governments, parliamentarians. So I think that's an opportunity here to get that right.
Okay, Sol, thank you very much indeed. Now I'm going to get to our audience questions. So I'm going to fire some of these at some of our panelists here. The first one that's come in is asking, what should be done to tax public buildings and offices for their water consumption? And would that help to balance things out? Asita, Belgian MEP in Brussels, do you think public buildings should be taxed and offices for their water consumption?
If I understand the question well, it's about taxing our buildings and
and offices. Yeah, in terms of their water consumption. Yeah.
Yes, I think we are paying already a lot of taxes. I think this is would be quite aggressive to people to tax them even more just for.
Yeah, but maybe it would be an incentive for them to do something, right?
I think what we can do is also sensitize people about not wasting. That is very important. And we need to also have the type of buildings we need to revise. And there is in Flanders a lot of progress on that. Our Minister of Justice and Environment as well, is really investing in that. She's working a lot on that people can innovate their houses or their offices. And it's quite supported publicly so that you can make it more environmental friendly, and you will need even less energy, less water, and less of all issues. I think it's important to look at that. I am someone who would approach things more positively. I prefer to persuade the citizen to do things better instead of aggressing them. Honestly, Belgium is a place where you pay the most taxes in Europe, even on your salary. So I wouldn't go out on that.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Mikhail in Poland has been watching us this afternoon. Thanks for joining us. He's got a question. What can Poland do and its citizens to retain and save more water? Obviously, he's asking about Poland, but maybe there's a question here more generally in Europe. What can citizens do to retain and save more water? Justin, what would you say to that?
Well, I think there's some things we can do personally, of course, use less water in our daily lives, but I think there's a lot of opportunity for the water suppliers themselves to actually be more efficient. We see in some major cities around the world where the leakages actually account for, say 20% of the total water supply. And if that can be fixed, then that actually provides a bit of a buffer against the potential impacts of climate change as well. So it's kind of like a no-brainer almost, but it does require good technology and innovations there to actually detect those leaks and figure out where the pressures are not right to actually become more efficient. So I think it's a bit of top down from the companies themselves, pushed by government to become more efficient, but also obviously we can do a lot as ourselves in terms of our water usage.
Okay, Justin, thank you for that. And Mikhail in Poland, thanks for watching us and thanks for your question. Hopefully that answered that. SR Dane has asked a question. How can the filtration and cleaning systems, such as those used in the UK, aid the issues regarding the availability of clean water? So Sol, you're a bit of an expert in this in terms of filtration and cleaning systems. How important are they in terms of their use, in terms of providing water generally?
I think it's important to invest in filtration systems to tackle issues of water pollution, of contamination. There's a lot of this that we do, for example, in Bangladesh, to tackle issues of salinization of the water resources. So clearly a really important part of the solution. I would know less on the UK specific side.
Okay. Asita, another one for you. I'm sorry to keep coming back to you. Can the EU, do you think, pool funding to help those areas where availability of water is an issue, for example, providing infrastructure and facilitating recycling plants, etc. So should the EU be looking to do more together to share resources to deal with this?
Look, I'm going to maybe sound surprising here, but I think, first of all, it's too ambitious to imagine that EU is going to be able to solve all the issues in the world, because EU is just a tiny part of the globe. I think that political leaders of every country are responsible in providing for their people. And some political leaders are not really doing it. I'm looking at some African countries where they're really just busy about themselves, and I saw it while growing up. And I think they need to take responsibility on that. At a level of development cooperation, there are already a lot of funds bilaterally poured into all kinds of issues, but we see that on the ground there is not really always a progress. So I am advocating to not give money anymore to public bodies, but only to NGOs and to organizations that are really active on the ground and that can be held accountable. Next to that, I am a strong believer of the contribution of the private sector. When you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, there are specific SDGs that are linked to gender, that are linked to access to water, that are linked to climate change and to living in dignity. And I think we need to focus on those as well. When companies are doing it, when I was working in the private sector, I saw that companies were really taking these into account, and that sometimes there are companies who don't want to work with a company that cannot validate or prove any existing contribution regarding the SDGs. We need to push that more and really at public level, as politicians, request an annual report adding to all the the financial reports to see that, so that it's a matter of reputation and a matter of contribution to society when you also add this. This could really help because it has an impact in that perspective. I saw one example, and sorry for being long, but this water thing is really exciting for me because it's touching to your capacity to emancipate. When I was in high school, we had a lot of issue getting to access water. But one day there was some organization installed a water pump. I don't know if water pump is the right word in English. But instead of going in a well when you are like a 10 or 12-year-old girl and going onto the well to bring water out of the well, and sometimes girls fell in the well and even died, they brought a water pump, so it was less dangerous. It was a direct investment into an NGO who did it. The result was there. It was on a ground that had actually water, so you could go there and fetch water that was clean and safe. So I think that is an example of what works. Instead of giving money to public bodies who never will open the water pump, nobody is going to have access to water, and nobody knows where the money went. That's usually what happens. Okay,
it's a very clear point you're making there. Let's go back to Justin in Southampton, just for a final question here. Justin, this person, Maria, is asking, there were an important number of environmental disasters throughout the last century that impacted vast regions and lots of people's lives. For example, the Aral Sea catastrophe. What could be done to avoid these catastrophes and improve the current situation? So in terms of the threat of environmental catastrophes going forward? Mm-hmm. Big question.
Yeah, it is. Well, I think the key thing to consider is a lot of these disasters, catastrophes were really human-driven. So the example for the Aral Sea, I mean, there's a climate component to that, of course, but it was really driven by the irrigation schemes that were upstream that were put in place by the Soviet Union at the time for cotton production, and that basically dried up the Aral Sea. And we see that in many other places where a drought can initiate what might turn into famine conditions, but it's not the drought that really causes the famine conditions. It's the kind of security and the political kind of situation around that really drives that. So it's very much the human impacts as well. So we do need to take climate change into account very strongly, but we also need to think about how we exacerbate those impacts, and therefore how we become much more proactive to mitigate those impacts as well, not make them worse.
Okay, Maria, thank you very much indeed for your question. Hopefully Justin answered that for you there. Well, we're out of time. An hour has gone past really quickly. Let's say thanks to all of our guests who have been joining us today for this very lively discussion about the future of water. Professor Justin Sheffield was joining us from Southampton in the UK. Thanks to you, Justin. Sol Oshuela was joining us from Argentina today, the Global Director of Policy and Campaigns at WaterAid. Thanks to you, Sol.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. Nice to see you. Also, thanks to Juan Pardo Martinez, who's the Research and Development Director at Nova Agric, who's joining us from Spain today. Thanks to you, Juan.
Thank you.
Nice to hear your thoughts today. And also, last but not least, Asita Kanko, a Belgian MEP, joining us from Brussels today. Thanks very much indeed to you, Asita, and also all of your personal stories and experiences that you also shared with us today. Really, really important, I think, as part of this debate.
Thank you very much. And everyone, please feel free to reach out if there is anything I can do in Parliament.
Great. Thanks very much indeed to everyone, and thanks to all of you in our audience who've been tuning in to this debate today. Lots of food for thought there, I think, as we look to the future of water amid all those climate change challenges, not only around the world, but also specifically here in Europe as well. If you want to watch the whole debate back again, you can do by logging on to our website, euronews.com. We'll also have some highlights on our social media as well. But for now, though, thanks very much indeed for watching, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.